The Common Good Podcast. It's Monday, the 21st of June, longest day of the year. Boy, so if you felt like, man, that was a long day, well, it was today. Meaning longest day, not that we get extra hours. That happens when we move our clocks backward. That's when you have a 25-hour day. That's technically the longest day of the year. But the longest sunlight of the year in the Northern Hemisphere happens today. It's summer, friends. Today is summer. It's the summer equinox, which I think here in Minneapolis, where I am coming to you from, I think happened at 10:38 last night or something like this. So I'd love to know where you are today. Let us know here in the chat. And if you're listening on the audio version, we really appreciate all those who do. Send us an email over at podcast@votecommongood.com. Tell us where you listen from, what you do when you're listening, and we'd love to know about how you're part of this, especially here on this most daylight day in the Northern Hemisphere that we have, which I'm guessing maybe in the other side of the Earth, maybe over in Australia, it's the shortest day. I feel like that's something I should know. But again, Doug Pagitt here with you. I'm coming at it alone today, friends. It's just me. Sometimes we have guests on, and sometimes it's just one fella doing it by himself, and that's going to be me today. So if you pop up in the chat, that's going to go a long way to inspiring your friend Doug here. So I'd love to see you join us on the chat. All right, a couple things happening in the world. Obviously, it's summer. A lot is developing. In the news, there's so many issues, but today, instead of talking about a sort of laundry list of news issues, of all of which I think are really important. I love our newsy days around here. I kind of wanted to talk about a larger issue that shows up in the news a lot, and there have been a few reasons I've been thinking about this. One of those reasons is that I'm part of a group of writers in a community of commentators. I'll put a link to it in the show notes and put it out here on the socials so you can find it. But it's a group of people from across the political and ideological spectrums, and we interact with each other's ideas. And there was somebody will write a prompt, and then other people will respond to it. And my friend Greg Hurwitz, who's a novelist, wrote a prompt that kind of got me thinking about the power of cancel culture. And what do we do about cancel culture? And is cancel culture a real thing that we should be concerned about? And all the rest of it. And I do think it is. I do think that cancel culture is real. I think it's powerful in our society. I think it's something that we need to address. So if you're unfamiliar with cancel culture, here's what it is. Cancel culture is the idea that people will be told that they're no longer worthy to be listened to because of a thing they did, a statement they made, an action that they participated in. And there are a lot of ways where people claim cancel culture. So they would say something like, "Well, my TV show was canceled because I said a racist thing." Some people on Fox News have done this, or a commentator on CNN was removed as a commentator on CNN, and he says, "Well, you didn't like the things that I said when I said that Native American cultures have contributed nothing to America, and that's an opinion I'm worthy to hold, and you've canceled me. You've said I shouldn't be listened to anymore." Yeah, okay, that's actually canceling someone. Like, he had a contract, they canceled the contract, or people had television shows, and those television shows were no longer put on the air, they were canceled, because that's what media companies do, right? So the idea that a TV show or a public personality is canceled, okay, that's at one level. But then it kind of turns into, issues at another level where someone says, "Well, I was the leader of an organization, or I was the pastor of a church, and I said things that people didn't like, so they removed me from my position." Then there's positional culture, cancel culture, right, where someone's removed from their culture, from their job. Fair enough. Again, organizations can do that kind of thing. So we've always wrestled with that, right? That idea that if someone acts, behaves, shares opinions that are not helpful to the organization, to the media platform that they're trying to do, they're going to say, you're no longer someone that we want speaking for us on our behalf. There's that level. There are politicians who try to claim this all the time. And there's a lot of irony in this and ridiculousness where like people are U.S. senators and they're on the news saying they've been canceled, because their book deal got canceled because they sided with the insurrectionists. We're talking about you, Josh Hawley. These kinds of people, like, okay, it barely counts that you would be canceled because your book publisher doesn't want to work with you anymore while you're still a U.S. senator and is on television and is saying stuff every day in both your public and private life. Just because some people don't want to partner with you anymore, that's, I think that's ridiculous. So I don't think a lot of us are overly worried about our television personalities, right, being removed from on air. The deeper concern is, does it happen to individuals? Is there a movement afoot in our society where people can't make mistakes? Now, what I think's happening personally is that with cancel culture, it's raising this deeper awareness that a lot of us have, that we live in a society that has very little space, very little room for redemption, very little room for someone to say, I've made a mistake and I did wrong. And after I did wrong, I can again engage with others. There's this feeling that if people make mistakes, especially certain kinds of mistakes, that they will be banished. This banishment narrative is what people are afraid of. Now, these aren't new narratives. Some of you, right away when you hear the word banished, you know that in the Jewish text of, the Jewish Bible text, that the early days when Cain kills Abel, in those stories of how did humanity get to the place that it is, when Cain kills Abel, Cain is then sent out, banished, sort of sent away, not alone, but moved out. And there's narratives, right, for this kind of banishment. Some of you in the religious tradition know that some of the people in the early Christianity were advocating that when people in a faith community lived badly or were disruptive to the community or were harmful to the community, that they should be called, they should be removed and called, until they can be called back in. They need to be put out before they can be put back in. So this kind of behavior, it's in our religious texts, it's in our societal texts. This is why we put people in jail. This is why we used to mark people with a scarlet letter of being an adulterer or something, is because we found those behaviors and those people to be inappropriate, and so we wanted all of society to put a mark on them that would show that they have been removed from the rest of us. Well, look, that is seriously dangerous stuff, right? Whatever the rationale was in the book of Genesis for this story around Cain and Abel, whatever the rationale was for the early Christian leaders to do this inside of Christian churches, or for people in our society to be banishing one another, to be putting permanent marks on people's records, and it's been very damaging. We're trying to fix some of that in our country, especially when someone is convicted of a crime and it haunts them for the rest of their life, and we give them then the category of criminal or felon. You certainly don't want people living with that burden their entire life. And there's a whole movement in the redemptive judicial system that I think is best summed up in a wonderful phrase that we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. Okay, so the idea is that we want there to be a path of redemption. Redemption is crucial for us. Like that's something that we really want and desire. So how do we wrestle with all these issues? That there's this driving force seeming in humanity that's not just been created by social media. It wasn't just drummed up since the Trump administration. It didn't just come out, in the polarized moments of the late 1980s or 1990s. This has been a part of the human endeavor, right? That every society has these actions, these ways of banishing. We use a list, we even put together lists of forbidden words that people can't say. Sometimes they're concepts, sometimes they're actual swear words or defiled words, right? There's even words that I can't say on this podcast because if we do, then it will get flagged and won't show up in certain people's feeds because it's considered profane and it's inappropriate. So this is what we do as society, right? We have lots of mechanisms for figuring out how to silence, how to quiet, how to keep things down. Sometimes maybe that serves us well. Other times we know that it hasn't. We know that if it goes too far, it's really damaging. We live in this culture of free speech and free expression and individual acceptance. And then at the same time, we have these demands that you don't say this, you don't talk about that. Now, in our society here in the United States, we're a little less on that. On the legal front, you get a lot of legal freedoms, where in some democratic countries, there's things you just literally can't talk about in Germany and other places, that you can't do public speeches about Nazism or the like. So this is something that everyone wrestles with. What I'm trying to do here is set a context where we understand, okay, we're not just talking about this limited moment of time here that we live in now and trying to, adjust for some sort of situation that's gone awry. This is a part of our life and our society as humanity. But is there a pathway forward? Is there an alternative to cancel culture for individuals, for organizations, for media companies, for all the rest? Is there a way that we can find ourselves with another path that we can follow, what I would like to call the path of redemption and being a blessing? Okay, so here's my suggestion to you, that what cancel culture raises, and this is also true when someone who's famous is when it's publicly made aware of the bad things they've done. Now that has a range of things, there's many examples of this. When powerful men have used their positions of power for sexual exploit over those that they work with or that they have power over. This is one of the long-lasting struggles in our society and in our world. That often it's men who have power use it for sexual purposes. They use it to hurt and to harm other people for their own sexual engagement. And when that comes out, people need to have a response that's proportional. It happens in media, it happens in businesses, it happens with people given authority by governments and states. I just heard a story on NPR, maybe you did too, a few years ago, of bus drivers in Brazil who were using their position of power to assault women when they were alone on the bus. Or you hear about police officers doing this, or you hear about people in work environments that threaten others with the loss of their job and therefore their income and the ending of their careers. So this is a thing that goes on. And when these stories come out, what do we do with people who have behaved in these ways? Sometimes it's criminal, and when it's criminal, then we can utilize the criminal justice system. But sometimes it's not criminal. And even when we do use the justice system, it often doesn't solve for the issues that we really want it to solve for. So there's that level of work. And then there's times when in our own personal lives, all the way over on the other continuum, when we have a friend who will start talking about things that we're just like, I just can't listen to that anymore. Maybe it's about politics, or maybe it's about religion, or maybe it's about how they view other people and social issues. And we're just like, I don't know, I just don't want to be around that person anymore. Is it right and good? And should you just say, I'm just going to break off this friendship? Is that the appropriate path forward? How do we do this? And how does anyone ever come back from the brink? How does the cane come back to the garden? How does the scarlet letter ever get taken off a person's body? How does the person ever come back into a community? How does the felon and convict leave that name and title behind and move back? How does a perpetrator of wrong and harm ever be seen again safely? So this is what this issue is really all about. And so I want to invite you into thinking about that with me on all of this. All right. So I think the answer to all of this, when we think about regret, I think we need to think about these words together: regret, confession, redemption, transformation, and blessing. let me say something about blessing here first. Blessing is a curious word. It's typically kind of almost a religious term that has been now used in much broader contexts. I don't know where you are on the word. I'm iffy on it. I really love the idea of blessing as something that we can be, that we have and are a blessing to be. I'm not as into the word blessing as it's used when we say it's something that we have, that we got a blessing, or even worse, that I am blessed. That notion that somehow blessing is something you possess, that it's something you obtain, something you've received. I'm not so into being blessed as I am into the idea of being a blessing, of something that feels to another person as if the very breath of God has shown up, that we live in such a way as if blessing is coming and coming, meaning that people can receive something that's not earned, deserved, worked for, fought for. That it's blessing, that it's something comes to them, and they receive that then as a gift. Never to hold it as a possession and never to identify themselves as someone who now is blessed, but that they can benefit from it. So in the faith community that I was part of for a long time, we used to use the phrase that we would live as a benefit and blessing to the world. I think it captures Jesus's notion of how we're supposed to live in the world. And that's something that really matters to me. So this idea of being a blessing, I think, is what redemption and what transformation and what confession is really all about. And I think locked into this is the notion of regret. That regret is not something we should treat scarcely. I think we should be rather generous and rather liberal and rather commonplace about regrets. As opposed to saying, hey, do you have any regrets? And then having to TikTok and kind of come up with one or two that you say might be a really, really deep regret. I think we need to become much more comfortable with saying, yeah, there's a whole set of things by day, by week, by month, by year, by decade, that we look back and say, yeah, I regret that. That is something I wish hadn't happened, wasn't the way that it was. I long for my past to have been different than my past was. Not to dwell there, but just to acknowledge. I just think when we raise the level of regret to something that makes it so unique, so exceptional, it makes it extreme. And look, it's okay that we have regrets. It's okay that we look back and say, I wish it had been another way. I wish I had been another way. I think that's sort of the key to it all. I think that's actually the key to confession. I think the difference between admitting something and confession, the notion of confession, is the idea of regret. The more we can become comfortable integrating regret into our lives, into our bodies, into our stories, the better off we are at saying, I now want to move forward. I see the way things were. I invoke my own desire for how I want things to be, and I'm going to then live in that way. And all of that seems to me ought to be about letting go and becoming a blessing. Now, what I don't think this transformation, this idea of redemption leading to blessing, what I don't think it's about is getting things back or not having to give something up or about not losing. So you know when those ideas come in, when someone is saying like, okay, I said this thing, but that doesn't mean I should lose my job. I shouldn't lose my family. I shouldn't lose my friends. And I think all I want to do, can I confess this and then just get back to the way things were? All of that language, all of that possession language, that I'm going to get it, I'm going to keep it, I'm going to hold it, I'm not going to lose it, I'm not going to give it up. All of that tells us that we're in this possessive state. And that's really different than being in the, I live with regrets, I want to live in a new way, I want the world to be different, and I want to live as a blessing. And those moments have shown me how I can then be a benefit and blessing to the world. Now, I know this is much harder in reality than it is, when someone's, waxing on and on for 15 minutes without any interruptions. I get that, but I think we need to have additional categories by which we can look at these issues, that we can call ourselves, that we can call one another to this greater place of life and of living. Now, one of the difficulties in this is that we live in this media world. We live in a media world that now is not only something we observe, not only something we participate in, because of what I would call the fantastic, wonderful, life-giving advents of social media, we now are media content creators. Whether you put up a post, you write a comment on this chat, as Tom and Esther and Mike and a bunch of others are doing today, or you're sharing a photo or something with a group of people in a chat. You're creating a kind of media experience. So we have media all over us, the most formal media and the more socially constructed social medias. Well, media allows us to do two things. It allows us to reflect, and it allows us to deflect. So it allows us to reflect on the ways that we want to grow, and on the ways that we are, and on the ways that we want to live in the world. You see, what media allows us to do is to see back about ourselves. See, most of us know how to be afraid, and we know how to be afraid of one another. We know how to be afraid of ourselves. So what we want to do is we want to look at that which is good to see that which is good in us. So there's a lot of media that we watch because it reflects back on us, because we see in it something we want to see in ourselves. There's been this joke for a long time about social media about why cat videos do so well. And I was talking with somebody about a documentary that we're going to make about our bike ride from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, to raise awareness around the issues of migration and border practices, calling for common good immigration and border practices. That project, by the way, is called We the People, and you can see it at wethepeopleride.org, what we're up to. But we're working on a documentary, so I was talking with a documentarian, and he was saying something about, documentaries, they're just hard to figure out, like, what's going to work. He said, my most famous one was about cats in, like, Argentina, and we barely made it for any money, and it's just gone crazy. Like, people love cat documentaries. There's something about that idea that, and this is why we deal with animals and love baby videos and all the rest, because we see an innocence, because we see a sweetness, because we see a kindness, because we see a loyalty. And that's how we want to see ourselves. So much of what we want to consume in our media is that which we are believing reflects where we come from and who we are and how we're living in the world. It's what the neurologists tell us our mirror neurons do. See, the mirror neurons are the ones that allow you to have empathy. They're the ones that cause you to yawn when someone else yawns. They're the ones that cause you to cringe when you see someone in pain. They're the parts of your brain that fire up when someone starts to laugh, and then you start to laugh, and laughs are contagious. All that contagious stuff, social contagions, those are being fired on your mirror neurons. So we like to look at the media that shows us who we are and calls us to who we want to be. That's the reflection side. This is part of the reason why people don't want to have other people in their media streams that are not like them enough. This is what builds bias. It's also what builds protection. Some people are like, I'm really sensitive, I just don't want to watch that stuff. Okay, that's all part of this same empathic response to reflection that happens in our media. Then there's the deflection. That's when we don't want to look at something in ourselves directly. So we want to deflect and look at it in another way. We want to outsource our difficulty and our pain. This is what we often do with things that we fear. This is why scary movies work for some people, thriller dramas, cliffhangers, because this is something that allows us access to that which is going on in our own lives that then we want to see in somebody else's, portrayed in someone else's life. So it's sort of the classic use of entertainment and story to reflect back on your own life in a deflected way. And also sometimes just a distraction, right? We just need to get out of our own world and deflect away from our own pain of what's happening to us and for us. So when we critique our media, the thing we should know is it tends to be about reflection and deflection. What it doesn't tend to be about is transformation. So to put the burden on our media for our transformation, for our redemption, for our confession, for our blessing being, it doesn't do that so well. That's just not how it's designed. Where that happens, I believe, is inside of chosen communities of redemption. This is the missing piece for so many people. We don't have enough of these chosen communities of redemption. The antidote to cancel culture is not to ask the media, is not to ask the judicial system to lead the way, or the political system to lead the way. It's to ask all of us to participate in chosen communities of redemption that call us toward blessing. And in those spaces, in those places, then we're called to recognize that there are things that we're afraid of. Look, as humanity, we live in fear. We live in fear of the monsters within us, the monsters amongst us. This is one of the great teachings of all human enterprises. Every teaching that tries to grasp what human beings are up to and how we're living in the world, it tries to deal with the monsters. Who are we afraid of? We don't have a lot of good categories for overcoming our monsters. Some of you know that I'm a pastor and I follow the Jesus teachings, and one of the things I love about Jesus' life and teachings are the way the miracles are used. I actually wrote a whole book about this called Outdoing Jesus. So if you're interested in a take on the 7 miracles in the Gospel of John from a different way, I want to pick that book up. I started looking at it. It came out 2 years ago, and I looked at it again recently for something I was working on. And this is not a humble brag. This is just a normal brag. I was like, God, this is a really good book. I really do like it. So that was sort of not remembering how much I liked it. I think you might like it too, if you like any of the stuff that we do around here on the Common Good podcast. So pick up Outdoing Jesus, see what you think. In the stories of Jesus, there are these miracles. One of the miracle types is walking on water miracles. This is one of those that people are like, oh my gosh, I mean, how does anybody believe this stuff actually happened? Won't get totally into the book right now, but I think what the miracles are trying to do is to call humanity forward, and they're an archetype of a new creation narrative. So what the Jesus walking on water miracle is calling us to overcome our fears to get to the other side. So it's not about the physicality of foot on H2O. It's about the story of how do we overcome that which we fear. It's actually a better story than standing on a lake that's not frozen. You see, in the ancient world, the waters of the deep was reference for that which we feared, for that which was powerful, for that which could overcome us, for that which could overwhelm us, that the deep would swallow you up, that the monsters lived in the deep. You know, we know a lot about our planet, even currently. Like we know that, 70, 80% water. We know that we're mainly made of water and all that. We don't really understand water. We certainly don't understand what's living in water where there's a lot of water. Bottom of really deep lakes. Never been there, don't really know. What's living at the bottom of lakes, people who and oceans, people who study this keep finding incredible creatures. And that's with all the knowledge ability that we have now. In the ancient world, those oceans, those rivers, those lakes, that was mystery. That was unknown. Those were things to be afraid of. The monsters of the deep. So what you see in the stories of Jesus then is that Jesus then walks over the place of fear, over the waters of what you're afraid of, both being swallowed up by the waves on the top and by that which lives under the bottom. The ancient waters were almost a living character. They were alive, they were active. They would pursue you, they could sort of come and grab you and get you. This sort of idea. Well, look, we talk about our own World Wide Web this way. We talk about surfing the World Wide Web. We talk about how if things sort of get totally out of control, it could overwhelm you. It could take your life. It could pull you down. All that same kind of imagery, staying atop of all of that, not being pulled down in it, not being overwhelmed by it, not being overcome by it, not being drowned by it. This is all the way we talk about our media and our social media life. So I think this parallel, this idea that there's things we're afraid of and that we find a pathway to walk on the waters and to get to the other side and not just to stay on the one side and on the one place where we are because the fear that lies between where we are and where we want to get to is the waters of the deep. So you walk over the waters of the deep to get to the other side. You could see how it's a story of human transformation, of human understanding, of people moving. And I think this is the idea that lies in a pathway of redemption that leads to being a blessing. It leads us over that which we fear, of all the monsters in us and the monsters that are amongst us. And I believe the way you get there needs to follow the patterns that are already happening in our world. You know, this notion of fractals, these repeating patterns through nature and through society, they're really powerful. The idea that you're going to have something exist in one space and then it's going to exist in another space and then it's going to exist in a larger space. It's these non-identical repeating patterns, fractals. Well, we need this in our lives. We have our own lives, ourselves, our own human experience, and then we have our families, which were given to us, and then we have the given communities that we're in. Maybe it's work or school or our neighborhood or our city. We have our larger society as a whole around the globe and in our country. But then there's one that sits between those given communities and that larger society, and that's our chosen communities. And I believe that it's the chosen communities where we see the greatest level of access to a pattern of redemption that can lead to blessing. It's in those. The way we're going to overcome cancel culture is not by demanding it of our society, not even demanding it of our given communities. It's by creating pathways in our chosen communities. Now, you know, in all the best world, this is what AA does for people. This is what other self-help groups, Weight Watchers and others, this is what service groups do. This is what our politics ought to do. This is what our faith communities do very often, but not often enough, is to create spaces and places of a chosen community where we're free to engage with our regrets, where we can talk about our desires, and we can be pulled forward into leaving behind that which has so easily entangled us in this other story, and then be freed to live in this new world that we can now live as a blessing. Because we're all going to do things we wish we hadn't done. We're all going to have this internal struggle. We're all going to say to ourselves, why do I do the things I don't want to do and not do the things I do want to do? Why do I live with this level of regret? And then we find ourselves making our way forward to saying, well, then how do I want to live? And holding on and staying put and keeping everything as it was, all those things that led into building into a life that wasn't leading us where we wanted to be. That's what we have to let go of. So what we need to do is then create communities of redemption where people are free to do this without the punishment that comes from the rest of society and the rest of culture. Now, this is what I think we're supposed to be pursuing with one another. This is what we're up to. So I believe that cancel culture, what it really ought to do is invite us to considering the ways that we can create chosen communities that are all about redemption and all about transformation toward becoming a benefit and blessing in the world. All right, so those are my thoughts today. I appreciate all of you on the chat and all that you're saying. And I'm just going to spin through this real quick and see if there's some comments that I want to engage with. When I'm doing this by myself, as I am today, I have to talk to all of you into the mic and straightforward. But then over on the side here, there are all the chats. So I'm just going to take a quick look at all this. Esther has a great comment. She says that there's this phrase that we blackball one another's for what we fear in ourselves. And I think that's really true. And even that idea of blackballing, that we've been conjuring up notions and catchphrases for how we're going to punish people for that which we fear. And I really do believe that the trust and fear question is the biggest one. And it's not about what we know and what we don't know that divides our society. It's about who do we trust and who do we fear. And that's a big one. All right, and so Jenny says people should be allowed to mute whatever they don't have the spoons to put up with, especially if they're targets of vile behavior. We shouldn't do the work of the right-wing propagandists by suggesting that we should put up with it. Yeah, that's a great point. Look, you shutting off the messaging that's coming from other people, that has nothing to do with cancel culture. That just has to do with you caring for yourself. Jenny, I think you're right. We should just find a way to not have people, to not hear people saying things that we don't want to hear. Now, you should check yourself all the time. Are you living in as a phrase likes to put it, an echo chamber? Are you living just in a little space where you're only hearing you and you're not hearing anything different? You don't want to be in that space. You're not hearing anything that, shakes your fragile bubble. Of course not. But there are things that are just no good for you. And staying away from all that, I don't think that has anything to do with cancel culture. I think that actually has to do with self-preservation. Is a pretty good thing. Marjorie has a great comment. She says, religion is the thief that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. She borrows a great Jesus phrase there. Love is God. Not knowing your true identity in Christ and thinking God is angry with you is the real meaning of the word sin. There is, she writes, no condemnation in Christ. Fear is our worst enemy. Perfect love casts out all fear. Yeah, I think what Marjorie's grabbing there, like these are the phrases when the early followers of Jesus were trying to reckon themselves with their own heritage that they've come from in their own society at their time and trying to figure out cancel culture and trying to figure out fear and trying to figure out redemption and how do we move to a path of blessing. The human pursuit, in other words. We didn't come up with this. We're on the path, the everlasting path that all human beings are on and have been on. And these are the kinds of phrases that Marjorie puts together there that give us hints and clues, or as my friend Kent Dobson's podcast, Hint and Guesses, great podcast. Love that phrase. These are the hints and guesses about how we can get there. To see that God is love and love is God and God's not angry with you and you can be freed from sin of believing that you're under the threat of God. I mean, Marjorie, I'm just going to wax for a little while further about this. I agree with you. I think the most important thing we can tell people from the Jesus story is that God is not your enemy and God is not angry with you. There are some people that will need to hear that every day, multiple times a day for the rest of their lives because there's a voice inside their head that keeps telling them the opposite. Some people need to hear it once and they're good to go. So wherever you find yourself on that spectrum, just know that God is not angry with you and that's not the story of life. Peggy has a great line. She says, when you're young, you want to be a teenager. When you're a teenager, you want to be an adult. When you're old, you want to be a cat. That's great. Okay, so Rick says define redemption. Thanks, Kent. Rick, I actually had a little note about that, and I want to say something about it. When I'm speaking of redemption, what I'm not talking about is just a return. I'm not talking about like when you redeem a coupon and you get your value, you get your worth. I think of the idea of redemption as freeing something to be what it's intended to be. That when something is redeemed. It's more like something is let go. It's freed. It is unleashed. That's how I mean the word redemption. Yeah, and then Amy Brown raises this great question about churches being the sort of the founders, or she calls it the parent of cancel, in terms of churches that practice shunning. Yeah, no, it's a real thing. It's the fact that faith communities of all kinds, because I believe that I think this is true, that every faith tradition that I know of in the world has some parts of it, some sections of it, of that religion that practice shunning. It's very common. Look, shunning is a human impulse. And the way we get over shunning is to have an alternative to it. Because it's so powerful, cancel culture shunning, it's going to be around, and we have to deal with it and not just try to be done with it. If you know what I'm saying. There are just some things in our life and our society that we have to actually go through and not go around or turn our back on. You actually have to provide an alternative to the whole thing. Sandy Greer is a great line. I do believe that true enlightenment means that we must leave one Garden of Eden after another. Yeah, look, the Garden of Eden story can seem just really childish and ridiculous and all the rest, or it could be seen as one of the early ways that we talk about human development, that what you see in the garden story of the early stages of humanity, because I don't think it's a story about how human beings got on this planet. I think it's a story about how we organized ourselves the way that we're now organized. So how did we become an us as a peoples, not how did we show up on this planet? And in that Genesis story, then, through that view, you see the story of redemption. Sorry, you see the story of transformation happening. You see the story unfolding of growth and of development. You could almost take the psychological development theory and look at the Garden of Eden story through that lens of innocence, and then of recognition, and then of acceptance, and then of having to grow and move beyond. So the moving out of the garden, not the Cain and Abel story being shunned, because that story, if you know the Genesis, either chapter 2 or chapter 1 or chapter 3 version, it's after the Garden of Eden story when Cain is then shunned or banished. So that happens at a later period of time. But there's a way to tell the story of Genesis which is really tied into our life and our human development. All right, so a lot going on. Well, hello from Fargo. Hey, great to have you along from Fargo. Okay, so much good here in these comments. So I believe I had this hat circa 2007. So he seems to be trying a bit hard, but as a pastor, he has some very wisdom and advice. I wish he didn't mention cancel culture so much, but it does give the idea of more depth. Ira, you had this hat in 2007? Well, that's awesome. I had it back then too. Don't think I'm trying all that hard with this hat. The ones on my wall over there, though, now those are a doozy. Those are work hats, if you know what I'm saying. Hey, love to have you all aboard. Thanks for all the comments. Thanks for being a part of this podcast. Share it with your friends. Share it with your family. Share it with your lovers and enemies alike. We'd love for people to know all about it. And if you're not already connected to the Vote Common Good world, we'd love for you to be. And if you don't already have plans to join us September 10th through November 14th, as we make our way along the border, please consider it. You can travel with us down to the border. You can travel with us from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, and all the places in between along the southern border of the country and the coast. Or you can do that virtually. You can be involved where you are. You can ride your own stationary bike or Peloton, or you can put together a community bike ride. You can find all that stuff over at votecommongood.com or wethepeopleride.org. You can get all of that there. You can also get on our emails, and we'd love to stay in touch with you. Thanks for being a part of the podcast. Thanks for all the great interaction today. And we will see you tomorrow when it's Politics Day around here, joined by Rob Ryersey, and we'll see you then. So happy summer. Longest daylight year longest daylight day of the year here in the Northern Hemisphere. So let your light shine.